Right now, you probably have at least one person in your life you'd call a friend, someone you trust, someone you'd share food with or warn about danger, or sit beside without needing to say anything at all. That feeling, that pull toward another specific individual over every other individual around you, feels so natural you've never questioned where it came from. But it came from somewhere. It came from a time so distant that the species doing it didn't even have language yet, didn't have tools worth speaking of, didn't have fire. And the fossil record is only beginning to tell us what that actually looked like, what it cost, and what it made possible for every human who came after. Let's start 4.7 million years ago, because that number matters. The split between the human lineage and our last common ancestor with chimpanzees happened somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago. By 4.7 million years ago, our earliest ancestors were already walking upright, already carrying things in freed hands, already living in a world where the decisions they made socially would determine whether they survived the night. The species we're talking about were proto-hominins, creatures teetering between the arboreal world of the great apes and something new, something that would eventually become us. And they were not doing it alone. The evidence suggests they couldn't afford to. Here's what the fossil record actually tells us. Ardipithecus ramidus, the species represented by a 4.4 million-year-old partial skeleton discovered in Ethiopia and nicknamed Ardi, shows something researchers didn't expect. Reduced canine teeth in males. This is significant because in most primates, large canines signal male-to-male aggression and competition. Smaller canines suggest something else was happening. Researchers like C. Owen Lovejoy, who spent decades analyzing the Ardi fossils, argued that this reduction points toward pair bonding, toward males who were provisioning females and young rather than fighting each other constantly for access. That shift, from competition to cooperation between individuals, is one of the earliest fingerprints of something we might recognize as a social bond built on trust, rather than just proximity. But pair bonds aren't friendship. Friendship is something more specific, more chosen. And the evidence for preferential social relationships, for individuals who sought out particular others over and over again, comes from what we can observe in living populations most similar to our early ancestors, and from what the fossils tell us about group structure. Australopithecus, the genus that followed Ardipithecus and dominated African landscapes from roughly 4.2 to 1.8 million years ago, almost certainly lived in small mixed groups. Not solitary, not loosely scattered. Groups with structure, with repeated interaction, with individuals who knew each other over time. And knowing someone over time is where everything begins. Think about what that actually means in practice. You're living in a group of 15 to 30 individuals. You sleep near the same bodies every night. You watch the same faces age. You remember who shared meat with you last season and who didn't. You remember who stood between you and the predator and who ran. Primatologists studying modern social species, from baboons to bonobos, have documented that these repeated interactions produce something measurable, something real. Individuals form coalitions. They groom specific partners preferentially. They intervene in conflicts on behalf of particular others, even at personal cost. The researchers Franz de Waal and others have spent careers documenting that this is not uniquely human, but something inherited, something ancient. What changed in our lineage was the depth, the duration, and eventually the scale. The environmental pressure behind all of this was straightforward and brutal. East Africa 4.7 million years ago was not a stable place. Climate shifts were shrinking forests and expanding open savannas, pushing proto-hominins out of the trees and into exposed grasslands where the predators were faster, stronger, and equipped with better night vision. A single Australopithecus on an open plain was essentially a slow, nearly helpless animal, but a group with coordinated awareness, with individuals who would call out warnings and cluster together and watch each other's backs, was something different. The math of predator avoidance alone would have driven the selection of individuals who bonded strongly, who maintained reliable alliances, who could be counted on. Defection from the group wasn't just socially costly, it was frequently fatal. Here's the part that tends to get overlooked. It wasn't just protection that social bonds provided. The earliest evidence of care for the injured and the very young tells us something profound about what these groups were actually doing. a 3.3 million-year-old Australopithecus afarensis infant, discovered in Ethiopia and designated DIK11, showed something remarkable. The brain was still growing at the time of death, meaning this child required extended care, extended provisioning, extended social investment far beyond what most other primates sustain. Someone, or more likely multiple someones, was keeping that infant alive through its extended period of dependency. That's not instinct operating alone. That's relationship. That's the specific, directed care of individuals who have chosen, in whatever way a pre-linguistic hominin chooses, to invest in particular others. Fossilized footprints at Laetoli in Tanzania, left by Australopithecus afarensis roughly 3.6 million years ago, show something that still stops researchers. Multiple individuals walking together, their paths overlapping, one set of prints falling inside larger ones as though one individual was following closely behind another, matching stride to stride. Whether that represents a parent and child, two companions, or something else entirely, we can't know for certain. But they were walking together. They were going somewhere together. And that togetherness, that spatial closeness maintained across distance and time, is one of the most human things the fossil record has preserved. Food sharing is another marker, and it may be one of the most important. Lovejoy's analysis of the Ardi evidence suggested that provisioning, males carrying food back to females and young, rather than consuming everything at the site of acquisition, predated cooking, predated hunting in any serious form, predated almost every other innovation we associate with humanity. Sharing food with someone who isn't your offspring, who isn't your mate, who is simply someone you've chosen to maintain a relationship with, is not something most animals do. It's costly. It requires suppressing immediate self-interest in favor of a longer-term social calculus. The fact that it appears so early in our lineage suggests that the benefits, the reciprocity, the coalition strength, the accumulated trust, were worth it. They were worth it because they worked. What's extraordinary is that all of this was happening without language, without ceremony, without any of the cultural scaffolding we now use to build and signal friendship. There were no words for loyalty or betrayal. There were no rituals to formalize alliances. There was only behavior, repeated across time, recognizable to the individuals involved through memory and attention, and the steady accumulation of shared experience. The grooming, the proximity, the sharing, the warning call given at personal risk. All of it was friendship in its most essential form, stripped of everything decorative, reduced to what actually mattered. We've added so much since then. Language and culture and ceremony and technology. But the core of what draws one person toward another specific person, what makes you trust some faces more than others, what makes you willing to pay a cost for someone who has nothing to offer you right now but presence and history, that didn't begin with us. It was already ancient by the time our genus arrived.